All right, good morning. It's 10 o'clock. Welcome to the Widener University SBDC presentation on Going Global, Exploring International Distribution Options. My name is Bill Pierce. I'm the International Trade Specialist for Widener University SBDC, and I love making these presentations. And I think there's a lot in this particular presentation that you'll find interesting, whether you're currently importing or exporting, whether you're thinking about it, or whether you're just sort of interested in generally what's going on in the world, because importing and exporting is an important part of the economy of the world as well as the economy of the United States. So I'm going to wait a few more minutes and see if a few more people join us. Um, we're a little light right now, so just give me a minute or two and we'll get started. All right. All right, so a few more people have joined us. So again, this is Bill Pierce with the Widener University SBDC. We're here for the presentation on Going Global, Exploring International Trade Distribution Options. And I hope everybody enjoys the discussion today. I am a pretty open speaker, so if you have a question, put it in the chat, and my worthy assistant, August, will field it and let me know. And I do have breaks throughout the presentation for you to ask questions. I really like to answer questions, and quite honestly, I'd rather spend time answering your questions than going through the materials here, even though it is really good stuff. So, so please find, if you have questions, please feel free to either put them in the chat box or wait till one of the question breaks and ask them then. And we will open the microphones up. We have a relatively small group today at the end for general discussion. So let's get started. Uh, okay, so Widener University SBDC, who are we? We are here to provide both consulting, which is at no cost and confidential to you, as well as educational programs. We are a resource organization for the Small Business Administration, U.S. Small Business Administration. And really what we do is we help people get connected with information. We don't provide funding, but we can certainly help you find funding, as well as just general strategy on how to take your business. And it really doesn't matter whether you're already in business, you're getting started, or even exits, which I've worked on a couple exits along the way. We're here to help. And coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot of people that need help, and we're certainly here to assist people in finding the right ways to take their business post, excuse me, post COVID. We are sponsored and funded by the Small Business Administration, the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, PrEP, and of course, Widener University. We have a lot of special programs that we can provide for specific needs. We have the PTAC program, which is a procurement program to assist people with government procurement. We have an environmental management assistance program, which we are the keynote for the state on that. We are a SAP Next Gen Lab for business development, as well as we have been recognized as a center of excellence for health and life science, as well as Latino businesses. Big staff we have here to help you in a variety of different ways. You got that handsome guy fourth from the left, but there's a variety of people in the SBDC who can provide assistance to you, again, regardless of what your business needs are, and also connect you with funding if that's what you're if that's what you're looking for. Okay, so to the presentation here now. I think August looks like we got a few more people, so that's good. Okay, so why international trade? This is a really interesting question. There's a belief that international trade is actually what caused the migration of peoples early in the world. There was a need to find new things to clothe as well as to feed. And there was migrations throughout the world, as we all know now. In the first century, people were already traveling over 5,000 miles to trade internationally. People from Italy, for example, were trading in Shanghai. People from Greece were trading in the southeast of Africa. And these trips took a year to go from Europe to the far east or to the south. And people were doing this with 30-pound packs on the back of camels. Um, and even after all this time, over 2,000 years, only about 1% of U.S. companies export today. So why would somebody want to export? Okay, there's a lot of reasons. One is um, there's more clients. Even in the internet world that we deal in today, 95% of the market in the internet world is global. Um, so it's a big opportunity. New business opportunities. There are places in the world where people will want your products, and there are changes that are happening in the world economically that will allow people who previously could not afford your products to buy your products in the future. And understanding those opportunities can be a real growth potential for your company. It allows you to diversify. When the economy is poor, maybe here in the US, it may be stronger some other places in the world, which has over the last 100 years has certainly been the case. It allows people to use excess capacity that they may have to sell more of what they're already making, but using the facilities they already have. Something that people don't generally think about is it actually helps you protect your domestic business. If you develop the product in the US and simultaneously somebody developed the same product in India, that product may actually be the global standard that takes over, and your product gets marginalized. So you want to know what's going on in the rest of the world relative to the products and services that you deal with. And also, it provides for a dynamic workforce. Wall Street Journal has recently talked about the workforce that comes from companies that export. It allows you to work with more diverse people. It allows people to be energized dealing with the world. Young people today do want to be very global in their mindset. It does help you with your workforce and finding people if you're dealing globally. Exporters outperform non-exporters in profitability over time, according to the U.S. Export Assistance Center. So it is an important opportunity for you, and I'm glad we have the time today to speak about this. Okay, so what do you need to be able to do to trade globally? Now, there's two things I'm going to tell you. One is when I talk about products, I am talking about products and services. Sometimes I'll say it that way, and sometimes I won't. But I don't want anybody to be offended if they're in services. We are going to talk about products and services here. And the other thing is, I'm not going to talk about international trade. I'm going to talk about global trade. And the reason for that is that global trade takes into account a lot of things I'm going to talk about on this particular slide. A global market considers not only the nations, but also considers the language, the cultures, and customs of those nations. For example, if you're doing business with the country of India, it might be nice to do business with the country of India, but there's about 150 dialects of language in India. There's about 7 religions, and there's about 53 distinct cultures and customs in India. So just saying you're doing business in India probably isn't enough. You have to understand where in India and under what circumstances you're doing business. Also, countries have different rules, regulations, and taxes. And the US also imposes over the top their will on these things, depending on who you're trading with. You've heard about the sanctions that have been levied on Russia and on North Korea, Iran, Saudi Arabia. These all have to be taken into account when you're dealing with global markets. And they're not just specific to the country, they're specific to companies and they're specific to individuals. So global trade really does not draw that line of distinction by legal states. that we would think of on an international basis. It really is understanding who it is you're doing business with and what are the requirements. To be able to import and export it effectively, though, there's a lot of things you got to take into account. One of those things is currency. Okay. US dollar is used throughout the world for the most part. There are places that is not used, like North Korea. But I don't think anybody on the phone today is going to be doing business with North Korea anytime soon. But there are places where it's not used. But you should be able to do business in US currency in most places. The key is making sure that the buyer is willing to do that. We'll talk about that. Payments, making sure you're going to get paid, and we'll talk about that. Deliveries of services, product protection, and I'll talk a lot about product protection, and returns and warranties. All these things are things that need to be done to be able to trade globally, whether you're exporting or you're importing or you're providing services to that sector. All right, so I talked a little bit about this, and this will be very important as we go through and talk about the distribution channels that should be considered. U.S. Has a lot of trade considerations. We are, to be honest, the number one trading country in the world. We don't export as much as we should, but we do import a lot. And we do have a lot of technology that people throughout the world, technology and products and services that people throughout the world really want. So as a result, the US has imposed a lot of trade restrictions on nations, specific products, as well as individuals. And we've seen a lot of that in the news recently. There's also requirements for licensing. So you just can't export anything. You may have to actually get a license to export your product. And there are lists. The consolidated screening list that I mentioned here is a tool that's available to you from the Department of Commerce and the International Trade Administration. And we can connect you with the right people there. They're right here in Philadelphia, really good people to work with. But you need to understand your exporting licensing requirements. There's also electronic export filing for sales over $2,500. My wife is formerly a Chinese citizen, now U.S. citizen, and she trades vintage jewelry back to China. She does that. She enjoys doing that. She enjoys buying it, and she enjoys exporting it. And believe it or not, this is jewelry that was probably made in China originally, but was never sold there. So she has people throughout China that want to buy this vintage jewelry. She buys it on eBay and she buys it at yard sales, and she exports it back out. She has to be very careful when she exports that she stays below $2,500 on the packages she ships back. So most of the items she ships are less than 50, so it's pretty easy to do, but it is a number that she has to keep in mind when she creates her commercial invoice that's required for shipping, that she stays below this $2,500 limit. Otherwise, she would have to go through and do an export filing requirement. All right. So it affects people big and small, I guess is really the point I'm trying to make here. There's also a lot of good, though. We have some bilateral, multilateral, and free trade agreements. There's about 25 free trade agreements the U.S. has with specific nations, which makes all this much easier. But there's also specific laws and regulations on the other side that you have to understand as you're doing this. So you have to make sure you understand all these restrictions. And that's why, frankly, I'm here, is to help you with those kind of things. And we have, through Widener, we have connections with the Department of Commerce, with the U.S. With the International Trade Administration, as well as the World Trade Center in Philadelphia. And we can help you with getting through this part of the equation, but it's something you really have to understand quite well. I'm not going to talk about labeling packages or anything like that today, but if you're interested in that, want to know more about that, we certainly can set up some time to chat about that. All right, so what do you need to be able to go global? Okay. First off, you need to have a high level commitment. It's a lot of work. Okay. Not that it can't be done. It's just simply a lot of work that needs to be done. And we say, to companies that are looking to do this, that may be only domestic today and want to go internet or go global, that they really need to have some high level management commitment. You need to have experience with your product or service. There's a lot of people that will come into these situations and want to take products that they find or think are interesting and re-export them. You really have to understand the product or service experience that you're going to offer. There will be some costs. There is some cash flow, and I'm going to talk about a couple things there to help on that today. And you need obviously to have capacity and capability to do this. But there's a lot of help out there for you. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection is the controlling agent for the U.S. They control both imports and exports for the United States, and they're here to help you make sure you can do this effectively. The state of Pennsylvania is one of the leaders in trying to promote exports from the state. The reason for that is we want to create more manufacturing jobs or service startups in the state of Pennsylvania. And there's a lot of help, assistance, and even some funding available to help you. I mentioned the SBA, I've mentioned the International Trade Administration. The US Census is also there to provide data on how to do this, and the International Trade Commission is also there. So there's a lot of help available to help you through getting this done, but you need to make some commitments to be able to do this. Okay, you can do it. Okay, but you're going to need a plan. And if you come back next month, I'll be doing a presentation on how you develop that plan for exporting your specific product into a global market. All right, any questions? I don't see any.
Yeah, there are none in the chat as of now.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to do a quick poll here. There's not many people on the line, but let's do this poll. Can you see this? The question is, who is currently dealing with global trade? Is there anybody on the phone today that's already dealing with global trade? I have one no. Two no's. Okay, well, this is good. This will help me. Okay, this will help me with how to tailor the presentation. I don't like to go too fast, but sometimes there's people on the line that already know this stuff, and I don't want to go too slow either. So I will kind of keep this to a level that I think will be helpful to everybody. And again, don't think twice about asking a question. I'd rather spend time answering your questions than going through some of the content that I'm gonna present. Okay, moving on. Okay, so when you look at the global trade markets, okay, and entering a market, there's really a risk and reward correlation, and they're direct. In other words, the higher, more risk you want to take, the higher the reward is. Okay. There's very simple ways to enter the market with today's technology. And market entry via the internet. As I mentioned, my wife does the vintage jewelry. Again, she buys it here in the US. She buys it on an internet site. She markets it on an internet site, and then she ships it on an internet site. She really, I mean, she does have a lot of inventory. Sometimes I think too much, but she really doesn't have to do too much to be able to source what she needs and get it to the market that she's trying to serve. And it really, over time, she's learned a lot and really has set up a nice little business for herself. If you want to take it a little bit more deeply, then you can get into indirect marketing, and I'll talk about this. But primarily, that's where you have a product that's unique, something you think people in specific parts of the world will need. And I say that very carefully because you do not want to be too broad in terms of the market you're going to enter. You really want to do your work and be specific to your market. So, that indirect marketing is one way to do that. Again, you don't really have to get too deep into it. There's ways to do this through third parties, and I'll talk about that. There's direct marketing where you actually go into the market directly with your brand. And again, a lot of people do that. A lot of people make money. And then what I did for most of my career was foreign direct investment, where we actually built factories in the countries that we were entering, and that allowed us to be present in the market. Um, all these things are go-to-market strategies, okay? And the market entry selection is a risk and reward decision. And I'll kind of walk you through that as I go through the presentation. I don't know why my little arrow down doesn't work. All right, this, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this, you know, this is kind of a good slide to explain that risk reward trade-off. Again, if you're doing indirect or internet marketing, your risk is really limited to what you have to go through to get the product to the customer, or what we would call political risk. Um, if you were exporting, if you were exporting to Hong Kong, and I spent a lot of time in Hong Kong early in my career. But if you were exporting to Hong Kong 10 years ago, you could literally drop it off at the US Postal Service and it would arrive in Hong Kong to the individual you are shipping to, no problems, okay? Today, as a result of some of the things now that have happened in Hong Kong and the Chinese position on Hong Kong, you no longer, it's much more difficult. You actually have to go through Chinese clearance before something can be delivered. And you probably have to align yourself with somebody who is an expert in importing into China to be able to get something to Hong Kong. So there was a change in political risk. Um, as you go up the scale, the risk increases. Economic risk, whether or not people can pay you or not. Commercial risk, whether or not your product is going to be copied. And there's all kinds of different kinds of risks that increase to the point where you're actually invested in the country, like we were, my company that I work for. And we had translational risk, where we had to deal with the local economy in addition to all the transactional stuff that we would normally have to deal with in exporting. When you build in the country, you also have to deal with the economy of the local country and what happens there. So this is a good slide to kind of just explain in more detail what I was saying about the risk and reward situation. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how you select the market. And as I said, um, the the selection of the market is really important. It's probably, after you have a product, it is the second most important thing you do, and you don't want to be too broad. Okay, um, and I have some solutions for you here also. So you want to research your market characteristics. You want to understand your product, competitive products, and substitution products. And I'll give you an example here. You know, in many countries of the world, there people are able to do the same things we do here in the US without all the products that we have available to us. So if you had a product that made it easier to take care of your child, maybe a disposable diaper as an example, and you are planning to ship disposable diapers to some parts of the world, they may or may not need it because culturally they have a different way of handling that particular situation. So there's a substitute product that you're competing with. It may be a brilliant idea to have a disposable diaper, but if they have a substitute product that they can rely on, they may choose not to buy your product. So you have to think about that. You have to think about products that already exist. And again, that's something that's changing the world over time. You need to know how you're going to communicate to the market. Again, language is not necessarily a restriction. Um, about 1.9 billion out of 7 billion people, 7.3 billion people in the world speak English. One of my favorite stories is the number one country for speaking English in the world is not the United States. It's not even North America. It's actually India. There's 500 million people in India that speak English. So if you're exporting to if you're exporting to India and the people you deal with speak English, which is a high likelihood, about 40%, then you have a good chance of being successful there and not having to learn local languages to be able to be successful. Um, Cultural perceptions are very, very important. I always talk about this. You need to understand what you're exporting. The example to the right here is a company I have a lot of respect for. I wish I could own one one day, but Mercedes-Benz went into China in the late 80s. And when they went into China, they wanted to have a name that they thought would be Chinese. It would resonate with the Chinese. So they took the name Benzie. So Mercedes-Benz, they wanted to call themselves Benzie. Well, there's one problem with that. Benzie in Chinese means rush to die. So imagine somebody buying a Mercedes and seeing the word Benzie or the Chinese characters for Benzie on the back, and that literally means rush to die. So again, understanding the cultural perceptions of the world are very important. If you're making products or you're packaging products for the Middle East, as an example, Middle Eastern people do not put pictures of people on their products. It'd be more typical to see um, clouds, nature of some sort, is much more typical in packaging in the Middle East. They do not put pictures of individuals on their packaging. So you have to understand that. Colors matter. Again, in the Middle East, I'll pick again. Blue is a very big color in the Middle East. So you have to really understand that. You have to understand if certifications are required, depending on what you're shipping, inspections or regulations. You need to calculate your pricing and know your margin. I had a conversation with somebody very recently, and they assumed that they were going to make a lot of money shipping globally, but they really had not done the calculations to understand the cost of shipping, as well as the cost of having a third party get it to the eventual client, fees that they'd have to spend at the borders to import or export. They didn't understand any of that. And when they were finally done, what they realized was they weren't going to make any money. And you have to know that. Now, one of the areas that the SBDC can help out with here is we can do a lot of market research for you for free through the network that we have, and understand the pricing, and then we can go through and calculate out the margin you're going to get to. So when you select the market, you got to make sure that you're going to be able to make money. A good example is that the Coke that you buy at McDonald's here in the United States for about $1, I think it was $1.07 the other day when I bought my Diet Coke here at McDonald's. If you buy that same Coca-Cola in China, and China is we all read the news, it's an emerging country, but that same Coca-Cola in China costs about 32 cents. So if you were planning to buy Coca-Colas and send them to China, you would have a tough time making money bringing them from here to there. Okay. So you have to understand what the pricing is in the individual countries. Pricing also is an important issue back to this discussion of substitute and competitive products. Your product, and I'll talk about this more in a second, but your product may or may not be accepted based on the cost of the product relative to the substitute. Okay. And last but not, understand your geographic considerations. It may be trendy to ship, winter coats and things like that to Singapore, but they're not usable in Singapore. Nobody in Singapore would ever wear a winter coat. Again, maybe stylish, but styles change and trends change, and you can't build a business based on that. So you really have to understand the geographic considerations you're going to face. One of the things that you'll have a huge advantage globally is made in USA cells. Okay. You hear a lot of things, but in reality, products that are made in USA, the ingenuity, innovation of USA is well regarded globally and well accepted globally. So it's a big advantage you would have marketing a product from the USA, made in USA throughout the world. There are places, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, it's well received US products. Okay, so that's the market. Any real questions there? August, anything?
Nope, none in the chat.
Okay, very good. I must be doing a great job. All right, let's go through let's talk about your product then. Okay, there are going to be differences between a product from the US and a product that's accepted globally. Okay, a US product, we talk about new and improved. We're constantly reinventing products, whether it be toothpaste or the next big screen TV. We're constantly reinventing products. Where on a global basis, people really are looking for unique products or products that are limited on a local alternatives. Okay, so for example, it was only, believe it or not, it was only very recently, very recently, that big screen televisions were available in China. The reason for that was there was a fear of exporting technology. Um, it wasn't until some actual factories were built in China and China was able to develop their own technology that large screen TVs were available in China. All right, so exporting big screen TVs was a very lucrative business. If people had the money, there was no alternative. There was no local alternative. So you could so you could make a lot of money and charge high prices for very large screen televisions. In the US, we focus on low price, okay? And I gave the example of the Coca-Cola, but we talk about coupons, we talk about sales. None of that exists outside the US. There are no coupons, for example, in India. I spend a lot of time, and you can tell, in Asia, but it's just not something that exists in most of the rest of the world for things like coupons. Certainly things are on sale. A fascinating story is where we talk about a 30% off price. In China, they would say the price is 70%. Completely different philosophy. That's the way they advertise it, is 70%. That means it is a 30% discount, where we would say 30% discount. But for most of the world, the issue is affordability, not price. So if the price was low in our minds, and it's still not affordable in a country like Chad, where sometimes things are very challenging for people there. Um, it's just not going to be purchased. So you really have to make sure you understand that. In the US, we want things immediately, right? Amazon, same day delivery, on time delivery. We want to know it's available. Well, frankly, that's not going to happen if you're exporting to the rest of the world. It gets there when it gets there. So the most important thing is effective communication, okay? Not necessarily making the delivery happen. You're not going to be able to impact that. So you got to make sure that you keep track of where it is along the way and communicate with your client. That will create ongoing and repeat sales. That's what my wife has done. She spent a lot of time on that. She's got great partners, and she communicates really well with her clients, and she gets repeat sales as a result of that. And not certainly not last, but not least. But product reputation in the US is very important. We buy based on specific brands, and the rest of the world does for the most part also. But what's more important to them is product information. Okay. The microwave that they buy, whether, whoever it's from, that microwave may be the first time they've ever bought a microwave. So they may need help in understanding how to set it up and how to use it. And I'll talk about that in a second. But your product somehow has to stand out to be purchased globally, and has to consider these factors on the right side in terms of being accepted on a global basis. There's a lot of things that you should take into account as you consider your product for exporting. Again, consumer preferences, needs, which we just reviewed, commercial and technical standards. The electric code, for example, throughout the world is different depending on where you're going. The electric code in Europe, called the EC code, is different than it is in the United States. One interesting story is my son, when I was living in China, my son came to visit me, and he wanted to bring his Xbox with him, which he was able to do. Didn't we put it in a suitcase and it was able to get it through the screeners at the airport and got it there. Um, just so you know, in the US, our power is 60 hertz cycles. In China, it's 50 hertz cycles. Most electronics are made for 50 or 60. They're globalized so that they don't have to have two different versions of the electronics. He came to my house, we hooked everything up, we plugged it in, and immediately the transformer fried. And I was baffled by this because it should have worked whether it was 50 hertz or 60 hertz. Well, after doing some research, we found out that he had previously damaged the transformer. His mother had bought him a new transformer in the US that was 60 hertz. So when he plugged it into the 50 hertz circuit at the house, it fried. It was more power than the transformer could take. So we had to go down to the Chinese store and we were able to actually buy a 50 and 60 hertz transformer for his unit, took it back to the apartment, it worked fine. So you need to understand these technical standards because it does matter. Offshore requirements and restrictions. Again, I've talked about that a little bit. There are things you have to take into account. There are rules, there are regulations on both ends, US as well as the country you're looking at. Country of origin. All right, that has to be marked on the package. And there are specific rules for how you declare the country of origin. If you buy something in China, and I'm always baffled by this, and you sell it on eBay, and you don't declare the country of origin, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. You actually have to say that it was made in China before you can promote it in the US. That's one of the rules. Same is true going the other way. Something has to be made in the US to be declared made in the USA. And the rule is 51% of the packaged content has to be made in the USA. Excuse me. All right. Instructions for use, I talked about a little bit. You have to make sure people know how they're going to use the product. The last thing you want is to ship something to somebody. They don't know how to use it. They damage it. And now you have a dissatisfied customer. And in today's world, it's too easy for people to post bad things about you if your service isn't good. Your delivery considerations, and then also your packaging, shelf life, and safety. A couple of years ago, my wife had been asked by a couple of people to buy some cosmetics at around Christmas time to ship back to China. She went through, she did her research. We were able to procure the cosmetics that people wanted. We packaged them up properly. We did, label the package properly. We shipped them, and they sat on the dock for 2 weeks in Hong Kong. Well, there's about a 70-degree difference between Philadelphia and Hong Kong in that time of year. So cosmetics sitting on a dock for 2 weeks, you know what they ended up being. By the time they arrived, they were completely destroyed. They had melted. So we hadn't taken into account that particular stage of the process. So we don't do that anymore because we know that we could run into that risk. The good news is that there's a lot of help available, and I talked about this earlier, from the SBDC network in Pennsylvania to help you with how to package your product, how to take into account the restrictions, requirements of individual countries, and do real market research to determine whether or not your product for export should be standardized or adapted. All right, any questions yet?
Well, nothing I can see in the chat.
Okay, so let's get into the 4 ways you can go about doing export. Andrea, go ahead.
I was just going to say we got a hand raised.
Okay. All right. Hold on. Let me put Andrea on the mic here. All right. Go ahead, Andrea. Yeah, your microphone's muted, but you can talk. Go ahead. All right. Unmute your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Thank you.
Hi. So I've been talking to someone from Pakistan who's interested in having me send him some cameras, iPhones, and like laptops from America
Yep.
so that they can buy them. Um, is that something you could help me with?
Yes, I can. And we really should talk about that because again, there's a value limit where you would have to declare it. And once you declare it, then you're going to be into the licensing requirements. So there's a lot of things we should talk about before you do that. But yes, that would be a business that people could do. The other side of it is, and I'll talk about that kind of at the end here, is getting paid, making sure.
Okay.
Okay, but
And
yes,
also, I'm asked that same question in Kenya, Nairobi, and also Haiti. They want the same thing. They want cell phones.
okay.
Ghana wants cell phones too. People in Ghana and Nigeria.
Yep, I can certainly help you with that. We should have a discussion.
Okay, great. I would love to.
Okay, very good. All right. Any other questions while I have the mics on? All right. All right, let's go back to the presentation then. So let's talk a little bit about market entry via the internet. This is the easiest way to enter a market. And in today's world, it really has just taken off. There's a lot of reasons why this has happened. Again, 95% of the available e-commerce market is outside of the USA. The USA has been the largest location for e-commerce. China has kind of taken over that position. China is a huge e-commerce market. A lot of things are bought now through e-commerce in China, and also imported and exported through e-commerce from China. About 1.8 billion people purchased something on the internet in the last 12 months. This is being done on business to consumer, B2C, business to business, B2B, and peer-to-peer, like an eBay site, is growing at about 12%. The reason for this is that places like Africa, as was just mentioned, places like Asia, are still really backwards in terms of their accessibility to the internet, where North America and to some degree Europe have been have really kind of saturated. So there's a huge opportunity outside the US to use the internet for marketing. Um, it's actually true that the US share of global e-commerce is declining. And this is true because Asia and Africa, which together have about half the population of the world, are rising. And again, connectivity is increasing every single day. All right. I'll get to your questions in a second. I just want to get past this one slide here because it's very important. There's 4 different ways to do this on the internet. You can have a US-based website or social media. You don't have to do anything different. You can be contacted, as was previously indicated, by somebody outside the US. And assuming they can do business in US dollars and you can meet all the other requirements that may be required, you can use your existing US-based website to market. People can find that. There are, though, limits there. For example, if you market on Facebook, you're not going to be contacted by somebody in China. Facebook is not available in China, so you're not going to be contacted by them. If you use a Google network, there are limits in place, and Europe now is imposing limits on the use of Google. So you could be limited for that reason. The other way to go is to go to recreate your website or your social media to more of a local market presence, and I'll talk about that in a second. There is a way to do that, and a very effective way, frankly, to do that. The most common is to use an e-commerce marketplace. Places places like Amazon, Alibaba are quite expensive, but you're seeing more commercials for Rakuten, which is a Japanese company on the being advertised. There's Latin American e-commerce marketplaces. There's micro e-commerce marketplaces in specific countries, and all those can be used very effectively. In that case, you're selling to somebody through the marketplace. It's easier to do your payments, your collections. You still got to deal with shipping, and you still got to make sure you're shipping the right things. And last but not least is to sell it to a third party reseller and let them sell. That's kind of indirect market entry, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But really, there is no limit. I say infinite, but there really is no limit on what you could do with the internet if you wanted to start a business. One of the things I'll say, and I know there's a couple of people on the phone I've talked to about this, it's very hard to do bulk on the internet and make money. The internet seems to be more set up for selling higher margin products on a onesie twosie kind of basis. And we can talk about that. If you want to contact me, I can kind of walk you through that. It's a little bit longer conversation than we're going to be able to do today. But there is a limit to the internet. And it bulk doesn't really work too well. Some of the other distribution channels will work better for large bulk products. All right. I'm not going to talk about this in a lot of detail, but again, I kind of covered it before. You have to make sure your website is able to handle the language, regionalisms, culture, communication, mobility. Most of the rest of the world do not have laptops or tablets. So your website has to be usable on a cell phone. A lot of people have websites that they developed themselves, work probably pretty well on a desktop or a laptop computer, but don't work well at all, cannot be used properly on a cell phone. It is different. And the picture, I love the picture here. This is a picture taken during COVID season in the Philippines. And the teachers are actually on the roof of the schoolhouse trying to deliver their virtual classes because there's no Wi-Fi available or limited Wi-Fi. They have to use their cell phones for broadcasting, and they were able to get their best connection by being on the roof of the school. I love that. I love that picture. I'm not going to get into it today, but there's also a lot of technologies you can use that will make your website more effective globally. Visual commerce, and I'll send it when I'm not going to go through it today because we're a little bit short on time, but there is a great video from IKEA that I'll send when I send out the follow-up that talks about this technology. And what IKEA actually did was take a technology where you could take a picture of your room and then carry that room picture to their website and actually move their furniture in and out of a visual picture and make a selection. Imagine how valuable that could be to somebody in a part of the world where they really don't even understand the furniture, and see how that would work out. So if you are going to promote on a website, it must be a finely tuned website or social media. It has to be able to do the things that people are going to want to use it. I'm not saying people won't come to your US based website. They will. But if you're going to try and be, if you're trying to get into a country, which is what we're talking about today, you really got to make sure your website is tuned up for what you're about to do. The good news is that there are programs available from the US government and the state of Pennsylvania to help you with this. And the International Trade Administration, a part of the US Commerce Service, will provide a trade specialist that will help you with developing your website. These are experts on websites and SEOs who can take a look at your website and help you with making it global, okay? And the good news is once you get that assessment done, the state of Pennsylvania is providing up to $5,000 to actually get the work done. So you could essentially get this work done for free if it's something you want to do. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's making Pennsylvania more competitive on a global basis and hopefully creating more manufacturing jobs. There is a small fee. I have to apologize for this. It's about $100 to use the gap analysis program from the International Trade Administration. So very reasonable cost, but they have to cover some administrative costs. That's why they do charge a fee. But there's no charge to apply for the $5,000 from the state once you're able to get the design that you need for your website. All right, so now we got to your questions.
One question in the chat was just simply about the PowerPoint slides. Will you be sending those out with the presentation?
Yes, I will.
That's what I thought. We just wanted to make sure.
Okay, no problem. Okay, let me close that. All right, so the next way to enter, and again, this is going in increasing risk, but increasing reward, is indirect market entry. Okay, this is where you sell your product through a US-based third party. There's a lot of reasons for this, why people do this. Good example is the one I have here on the right. There is no Apple store in the Philippines. Okay, the reason for that, and Apple actually says this, is because they're simply busy developing stores in the rest of Asia, primarily mainland China, India, and Hong Kong. And as a result, they don't see the same opportunity in the Philippines. So they've actually rebranded themselves to iStudio in the Philippines. iStudio is a US-based company. They are premium reseller of Apple products, like it says here. But that's who operates the stores in the Philippines for Apple. If you go to Shanghai, the largest largest Apple store in the world is in Shanghai. It's there. But if you go to the Philippines, you're not going to go to an Apple store. You're going to go to an iStudio. Okay. So they found a third party to help them enter the Philippines simply because they just don't have the resources to do it themselves. The biggest, most valuable company in the world doesn't have the resources to enter the Philippines on their own. And it's no surprise that you would also be challenged with the same thing. So how do you do this? Well, there's lots of different kinds of ways to do this. One is finding an export management company, and they are available. I can give you some companies that I would suggest. There are also trading companies where you would market your product to the trading company. They would handle the rest, and they would do the selling on your behalf. Okay, you stay indirect from the country that you're looking to enter. There are resellers, people that buy things in the US and sell them elsewhere. That example came up earlier on one of the questions. There are co-producers. You market your product, or I'm sorry, you develop your product, you license your product to the co-producer, they produce it and they ship it and they handle the sales outside the US. The biggest risk with this type of situation is what's called a gray market. And a gray market is where somebody is able to get access to your product and they develop their own product that's a copy and they sell that in the rest of the world. So you may not get all the sales that are available. This is why when you do it this way, you really have to make sure you're dealing with somebody you can trust, a reputable company, no matter whether they're a reseller, co-packer, EMC, or ETC. You want to make sure you're going to be working with somebody who's reputable, and you're going to make sure that you have contracts in place to do this correctly. But it is a good way for you to sell your product outside of the U.S. There are a number of online EMCs that are emerging that are making this quite easy. That you actually sign a contract with them, you get them the product, and they handle everything from there. So it's become very easy to do indirect market entry outside of the U.S. All right, so what are the benefits and disadvantage? Okay, you don't require any international experience. You don't have to learn anything. You don't have to learn language, culture. You don't have to travel there if you don't want to. It makes it very easy. Much faster to market than trying to develop an internet channel. Your management does not be distracted because all you have to do is make sure the product gets supplied to whoever's going to handle it for you. It limits your financial commitment, and you stay in the U.S. legal environment. That's why I mentioned contracts before. When you sign these contracts, you are dealing in U.S. courts. Keeping in mind that in China, there are no courts. In some parts of the world, there are courts, but they're not necessarily business savvy. So you have to really make sure you understand that. But there are a lot of benefits to that particular channel, this particular market entry channel. There's disadvantages though. You lose control of your product. When you ship it and you give it to somebody else and they handle everything from there, you do lose control. You got to make sure you understand what they're going to do with the product and how you're going to get paid. Wrong market, wrong product. Somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want to take a product to a country, and they love your product, they want your product, and then all of a sudden you have no sales. That's a good example of wrong market, wrong partner. Inadequate market feedback. You don't hear from the customers because you're not selling the product, they're selling it for you. And last but not least, reduced margins. And this could come in either of they take a significant part of the margin, or a gray market situation where they're selling a copy of your product in places and you don't receive the full value for your product. It actually competes with itself on price and reduces the margin for the product that you're providing. Okay, so there's some great benefits to this. It is much quicker. It is a more advanced way to handle the market than an internet channel, but it does have its challenges. Let's see. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. Okay, so then the other one would be a direct market entry. Okay, I don't know why this slide's not right. Okay, in this situation, you need to find a partner who's going to help you. Hold on. Okay, it's indirect. Okay. All right, I'm not sure what happened here. Okay, so let's move on to direct marketing. Sorry about that. It just kind of got me confused here. All right, so let's talk about a direct market channel and talk about the contrast. In a direct market channel, you market through the host country, okay? In other words, you find somebody in the country who's willing to take the product and market it for you in that country. Typical example would be distributors, agents, brokers, companies that do licensing, and companies that do franchising. McDonald's does not market their product directly outside of the US, and there's a really good reason for that. One of the reasons is the legal environment. So McDonald's has franchisees who have legal contracts and do the marketing for McDonald's outside of the US. If you look at the description though, what you'll see is you are on the outside looking in. When you provide a product to somebody in a third country, you are taking a lot of risk that they're going to do the right thing for you and they're going to take care of the market. They may be very effective, okay, but you have to make sure that you understand what they're going to be able to do for you, okay? The advantages of direct marketing are that you can gain international experience. You can get a little closer to the market and get to know people in the industry in that particular market. You will learn about the market and cultural information. It continues to limit your financial commitment because all you got to do is make the product and get it to the reseller in the country. And the risk is manageable, okay? The disadvantage is you have to write contracts, you have to set up systems for shipping, all the stuff that I mentioned earlier that you have to do, you still will have to do if you ship to a third party in a country. You lose control pricing. Your cash flow may be limited because again, they're going to collect the money and send it to you. You have to make sure you have a method of getting paid. Your intellectual property becomes at risk. Now, in all these cases, I have another presentation I do on intellectual property. I'm not doing that today, but intellectual property risk is a big issue anytime you move outside the USA. You have to be able to protect yourself, and the courts are not going to protect you or your company outside of the US. If you have any questions on intellectual property, we can certainly have a conversation about that. I'll provide the information to contact me at the end. The other thing that's at risk here is your name and your reputation. If you ship product to a third party and they do a lousy job, or they don't provide aftermarket service, or they damage the product or alter the product and provide it into the marketplace and it doesn't work, it's your name and your reputation. Okay. In order to be able to do this, you have to be able to have people that can manage this for you. You'll have to add export resources to be able to do this effectively. Okay, so now I'll go back. I don't know how these slides got out of order. I'm sorry about that. One of the ways to do this effectively, though, is through the International Trade Administration matchmaking service. Okay. The only requirement on this process is it has to be a US origin, okay, or 51% US content as packaged, okay, because packaging does count depending on how it's packaged. This service can provide people in countries that have been vetted by the US government. So we have embassies throughout the world. They are collecting information constantly, and they can provide you important feedback on individuals who can do a good job for you, who can, in my words, be trusted, and people that really, would be good opportunities for you to work with. They can actually arrange meetings with up to 5 potentials, and they can have people at the meetings with you that speak the language. There is a significant cost for this one. It's anywhere from $1,000 to $2,300. It can get to $3,000. And then there's an additional fee for arranging, attending meetings. But I think it's an excellent opportunity for people who have something they want to export. They want to use a direct exporting method. In other words, they want to take the product that they've manufactured here, send it somewhere else in the world, and have local people market it. That's an example of that's a good example of how to handle a bulk product. Okay. All right. Questions?
Still nothing in the chat.
No, there was one in the chat. Oh,
Just a thank you.
Alice says thank you. Okay. Very good. Okay. All right. Any other questions there? All right. This last one will I'm sorry, these slides are out of order. Okay. So this is important. I'm not going to go through this whole thing. There's 7 rules, and this is actually a published article from the Harvard Business Review. It's dated a little bit, but I think it's very accurate what it's saying. But there are 7 rules in selecting a distributor partner if you're going to do indirect or direct marketing. Okay. The important thing that's underlined here is you select the distributors. Don't let them select you. In other words, someone calls you on the phone and says, "Hey, I have clients for your product." You can follow that lead, but make sure it gets vetted and make sure that it's a decision you make, and don't let them make that decision for you. Same way, if you have a distributor that you'd like to work with and you contact them and say, "Oh, I can't," and they say, "No, I can't take on your product, but I have somebody who can." Again, you got to do your homework and make sure that they're going to be a good partner for you. Okay. So I'm not going to go through all these. Again, this will be included in the deck that I send out, but please understand these 12 things. I'm sorry, 7 things. I really do think that these are very valuable information for people to think about. All right, last one, foreign direct investment. This is what I did in my career. I built factories throughout the world. And basically in foreign direct investment, you actually invest in offshore markets. So if you had a product that could be made in the country that you want to move into, it's a good opportunity. This is going to mean, though, that you're going to have local sales. You're going to have local warehousing. And again, that may be all you do, is that you ship to a warehouse and then you have people locally who sell the product that are your employees. There are small companies, less than 500 employees, that actually do this throughout the world. It's become a very valuable branding exercise to be able to ship commodity products like socks is a good example to parts of the world that are still growing and may not have the facilities to make those kind of quality items. And you can take and you can find people to manufacture those items for you in those countries. And that's a very trendy thing that's going on right now. You can also do joint ventures and partnerships, and you could also acquire a company to do this manufacturing. And this is the Nike factory in Vietnam. I have been to this factory, and there's a lot of shoes that come out of this factory, and it's in a nice area. People are well treated, well respected, by the Nike company. All right, so the advantages, your costs are going to be very low. Your operational efficiencies will be better. You'll be able to compete on price where you cannot probably compete on price with any of the other three distribution methods. Your market and cultural information will be gathered locally, and you'll have a lot of local market goodwill. As I said, the Nike factory in Vietnam has done a great job of taking care of their employees, and are well respected in that country. Disadvantages, it's a huge management commitment. Okay. When I lived in Asia, we had 25 US based expatriates living in Shanghai. It was a huge investment for our company, but we were trying to grow strong in China and India and Korea, and it made sense. We were able to do that. We had to put a lot of capital on the ground. You face double taxation, which you hear about regularly in the news now, where you're taxed in the local country, and then you also are taxed when you bring the profits back to the US. And then you have this risk of in the country that something goes wrong. Again, a lot of factories, I don't know if people have seen this, but a lot of factories in India today are closed because of the pandemic. They had a second surge, and the government has shut down a lot of factories in the country. I have a client who imports the shells for motorcycle helmets. They make very customized motorcycle helmets, and they cannot get the shells for the motorcycle helmets right now because the factory is closed. They have backlogs and backlogs of customers, and they're essentially out of business today because of the country risk. So there is risk of being in a country. Financial is, economic risk is quite high if a country, makes a bad decision, tries to grow too fast, things like that. All that has to be taken into account. So most offshore marketing control, and it gives you, it gives you the most offshore marketing control, but it's a huge commitment. Okay. So if you're looking to do export, okay, here's kind of a checklist. And again, I'm going to send this out. This will be in the materials. This is a really good article from the International Trade Administration. It talks about which channels to export and the best ways to be able to export. So in summary, select your market. You can't go everywhere. Do your research. Trade.gov, and I'll send that link out also with the materials, is an excellent resource to investigate countries. If you're ready to go forward, do some market research through the SBDC network. Again, it's free. If you're going to do internet, use the service from the GAP process, Global Access Program, through the ITA. The Pennsylvania government, the Community Economic Development, will fund that for you. Know your product. Why will people buy from you? Make sure you do your market research. Again, another way to use the SBDC. Choose a distribution channel strategy that makes sense. Make sure you evaluate your partners, advisors, confirm your commitment, and create a written plan. And I will also provide instructions for how to do exporting. There's a great website for creating a written plan to do your exporting. The Widener University SBDC is here to help. And here's my contact information. All right, so we went a little over, started a little bit late, and I was a little lengthy on some of the things we discussed. Are there any questions?
Still nothing in the chat, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in there. Or if you want to raise your hand, we can always take you off mute as well.
All right, and so here's my contact information. If you'd like to learn more or discuss a specific situation, please feel free to contact me. I do appointments all week, so I'm readily available, and we can go through and talk about your plan. Again, I am a big advocate of exporting. I think that's something that the U.S. as a country has a lot to offer and needs to get much better at than it is. To give you an example, about 25% of the global domestic product of Japan is exported. Only about 7% of the global domestic product of the U.S. is exported. Only 1% of all the companies in the U.S., and there's 34 million companies in the U.S., export. So there's a really good opportunity with the internet. As I said before, there's a real easy avenue to go. If you have a product that works great in bulk, then we have a lot of resources that are available to help us with finding the right partners to get those products into the market. So I hope this was a helpful presentation. If again, feel free to reach out. And one last call for questions. Any questions? August, anything to add?
I think you hit everything. There's some also additional really cool examples, like the computer one. I thought that was very interesting. Never would have thought about 50 to 60. It seems like a little change, but the little things make the difference.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, listen, thanks everybody. Really appreciate the time. Have a great day. And again, feel free to reach out, and I'd love to help you as you consider global trade going forward. Have a great day.
Have a good one, everybody. Thank you, Bill.